Vår første gjest I kveld, hun hentet inn som CEO til et selskap som mange har fått kjennskap til gjennom idretten og barn. Trine Falnes, velkommen til deg.
Tusen takk.
So Trine, tell us more about your background and experience. As I understand, you were hired into Spond to scale the company, and you have a long experience in doing this.
Yeah, so like my background is actually primarily in media and just kind of doing things from more like an entrepreneurial point of view, you know, like where you build up the company or like a new division or like a new, like drive new products from the inside of a company. So I've been now with Spond for a little more than 2 years. Before that, you know, I've spent the majority of my career working for like media companies. Like I worked with the Schibsted group for a while. I was a trainee there originally, like right out of grad school. And then I was 11 years at TV2, kind of running up their digital media proposition. And then I joined Discovery Networks, where I was the vice president of digital sports for the Nordics. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That was not even little compared with a lot of other guys working from Norway and scaling ups. And now it's Spond's time. I mean, what's the difference between Spond? I mean, it has a huge success now in Norway.
Yeah, so I think Spond it's a really interesting company, you know, like so Spond is a Norwegian startup that's now kind of moving into the scale up phase. We're based in Oslo. We also have a permanent development team in China that we work with. So we have essentially like a product suite that's like the app, which most people engage with, which has about like 900,000 monthly active users right now, of which half of those are in Norway. Then we also a little more than a year ago, we launched like a club management tool. So that's for like associations or organizations that are kind of bigger that manages a cross group. And we're also just before, like at the back end of last year, we launched also digital fundraising capabilities. So yeah, it's a very exciting journey and just kind of excited to get out of the pandemic and start scaling things more rapidly.
And then of course, you've been working closely with Sarah and her team at Escalon Services. I mean, how do you feel? I mean, what are you facing? I mean, in terms of you and Trine working together, how do you do it?
Well, we only joined working with Trine and her team a couple months ago, but it is with the experience of, you know, Spond is expanding and growing rapidly, so it's taking some of our operational knowledge and know on how to streamline processes on the back end. To make some of the manual processes less manual, automation, so that you can do more, not with less, but do more in a sort of exponential manner, right? Versus just one more stuff.
And then what's your experience around scaling then, Trine?
Well, I mean, you know, I think there's a lot of it's always a lot of attention given to like the startup phase of any company. You know, it's like a big celebration once you make it beyond that. But I think actually like that you really need to give a lot of attention to the scale up phase. Like it requires a lot of support. And I think, you know, what we're doing right now is just essentially like working a lot on getting the pacing right. And I think like given the pandemic, that's also a massive challenge because it's anything from like how much do you push in a local market, you know, like what kind of staffing do you bring on, in what capacity, what roles, you know, and like what roles do you hire for versus like what are other ways to kind of strengthen your bandwidth, you know, how do you deal with consultants? So I mean, there's like a plethora of kind of things that you need to be on top of. I also think like one typical thing for scale ups to kind of be mindful of is you know, when you're in the earlier stages of your company, it's very much about getting the product right. And typically you would have, I think it's like people are always talking about like the 80-20 product tech versus business, right? But when you get into the scale up phase, it's all about building out those capabilities. And a lot of that I find is like more on the business and kind of business engineering side. So I guess that's a little bit of like we're doing right now, trying to kind of puzzle that together and make sure that we get it right with the pacing of things as hopefully the world reopens.
So in that mind, you know, what so far have been the sort of not the speed bumps, but where have you been surprised to hit the challenges as you were building out sort of the business capabilities and operational spirit? Which areas have surprised you that have what you were not expecting?
I wasn't expecting the pandemic, Sarah. No, no, I mean, like that, obviously, like, that's been something else. But, I think, I don't know, it's not like you're not expecting it, but I guess like as you kind of live it, you have to make the right decisions. And I think, so it's almost like not roadblocks, but more, things that you have to face moving on. I think, um, you know, early research is that's where you're figuring out the next big thing. And I think it's always kind of it's one of those things where it always takes longer than you think, that early validation, early kind of insights, once you know what you're going to build, and once you know kind of what the next steps are, like that's not the biggest thing to actually put that together. It's more, how do you get there? I think you always, like, when you map out kind of projects or things you want to explore, you tend to put like a phasing on that might not be right, because it's all about getting it right, as kind of the foundation of what you build from a product point of view. And I think now that we're dealing with multiple markets and just trying to figure out how things work in many markets, but still we haven't put in place a local presence in a lot of the different markets, so it's more getting all the nuances right from a legal and regulations point of view as well, really kind of working out all the little kinks of the different markets, and making sure that you build off of that in a smart manner is something also that takes a lot of time and energy, and it can be quite costly, quite frankly, because it's so diverse what kind of legal consult you need. So you're going to have to shop around. You can't just hire that capability in-house.
I'll hone in a little bit more on the legal side, because I know that there's been it's been some roadblocks there that I think probably were a little bit of a surprise, that took a lot longer. Would you say this is something that a lot of scale-ups don't realize, the sort of the league, once you cross international borders and you're dealing with different industries, that the legal structure is actually quite critical to the business structure? Do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience here in the last 2-3 months about this?
Well, I just think it's like when you're doing kind of cutting edge R&D, and you're doing things, like you're always striving to do things that haven't been done before, or like when you're trying to kind of digitize existing processes, what like I've found is that a lot of what we're trying to do is it's quite exploratory. And when you look at like rules and laws and that kind of stuff, those are typically not like fresh off the boat, like they're dated, they're kind of predated what we're living. So that's a little bit of the challenge, that you're also, there's that uncertainty about, okay, what's the application of this law, given that it was like actually made in like 1968, and we're now trying to figure out how, like, what's the space when you digitize the processes that were described from a legal point of view, but against a completely different backdrop. So I think that's where, I just always, we work with like some of the best when it comes to like legal counsel and advising on that. And I think, even like managing that when you're done talking about what does it look like in a completely different market, against, a European backdrop, obviously like a lot is getting kind of more harmonized. So that's good, but you'll always still find like, you need to verify it against the local, or like the country-based legal framework as well.
And now you're so legal scaling definitely a big problem for every company.
I wouldn't say like it's a problem, but it's just something that, when we're super agile and we love to move fast, it's just more that there's a little bit more of a process there, at times. Like it's typically, you would think in your mind that, okay, you like validate a case for one market, then you roll it out, right? But there's like, you still have to, there's still a checklist of things you kind of have to go through and revisit and optimize for. So it's not just that easy,
Oh, interesting. So things takes much more time, and typical being from Norway, we always very eager to do things fast. But you mentioned a checklist. So what's on your checklist when you're going to a new country?
Well, it kind of changes every once in a while, but I think typically, it's like making sure we have enough insight. So I think like we have a really fantastic product team that would just make sure that we always have, those early insights, like what are the needs, So like we talk to a lot of our users like all the time, like when we think that we have like our hypothesis ready to go in terms of what are we going to build, we always make sure that we have lots of time with our users to validate that and optimize for it. So it's that kind of continuous feedback wheel and integrating that into the product and kind of like your launch plan. So I think what I like to think about when I go into another market is that it's not like like it's about having a playbook a little bit of like tools you can apply or like tactics, but also being open to the fact that the mix of those tactics would vary per market. In some markets, maybe partnerships are more important. In other markets, maybe, PR is more important, or like comms, or, that kind of stuff. And then, so I think it's just more, when I talk about the checklist, it's more just kind of your base hypothesis of like, what do you think would work in terms of making something fly in a market? And then the stacking of those would vary per market.
So when you do approach different markets, where do you find the advisory or resources in the local markets that can help validate or guide you through the nuances in cultural and legal nuances in the various markets you're approaching? How do you source that? Do you use your board, LinkedIn? I mean, I've actually no idea. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Sarah. And I wish it was more like, okay, here are all the resources you'll need, for excellent legal advice, push one, like, no, I'm joking. Like, obviously it's not going to be like that, but I think that's like a little tricky sometimes, but I find that we've kind of identified some really amazing users of ours, and people who have like kind of been friends of the house for a while that can always help like point us in the right direction. And I think, just asking other people who've done the same things. Like I talk to lots of people that have been through this, or like that are going through the same thing in terms of like, okay, if you wanted to, like, have you worked with a good PR company, or like, have you, do you know of someone who really knows this space, or like, do you have any insights or anything that you could share? I think that there's a lot of people cheering each other on when it comes to the startup and scale up world. So I think having a network and people that you can ask for advice is like, very beneficial if you do so. I think people are always kind of ready to help and support you.
Yes, obviously a global network of people would be helpful, and being from global business yourself.
Yeah, I think for sure, like the networks, but also like the networks where people have kind of lived the same journey and, explore the same markets. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be from like the same angle or anything, because I think a lot of like market entry stuff is, if you're like, regardless of kind of the bare bones, like what's the essence of the product that you're delivering, I think the things you're going to go through when you enter a market are to a great extent, more or less the same. So yeah, I find that if you reach out to people who've kind of done the same thing, there's a lot of insights.
So in terms of next step for Spond, I mean, what market, what business, how are you thinking now? Is it something you can share with us?
Well, we've been like really blessed during the pandemic that like, obviously it's been like a massive challenge for like the world and all of our users, but at the same time, we've been able to serve our users in obviously like a way that we didn't originally plan for. So it's been fantastic to see that the product kind of can take on different roles against different backdrops. So we're just super eager to get back to, continuing to scale the company, continuing to onboard more users and explore kind of new directions from a product point of view too. So we've had, we're really excited about our position in Norway. And I think additionally so, we have a really strong traction in the UK. So that's a market that we're spending a lot of time on now, and that you'll see us kind of increasingly enter and spend time on. So I guess it's more about continuing our growth in Norway, and continuing kind of staying on top of our users there and talking to them and understanding, like, as the world opens up, like, are the needs the same? Like, are there new needs coming out of this? And then doing the same thing in the UK, like, and continuing our growth there as well.
Yeah. So any more follow-up questions from you, Sarah?
Any practical tips that you can give fellow entrepreneurs who are on the brink of scaling up, now that you've had some experience and continuing to get experience around entering new markets and scaling up, that you would have appreciated knowing, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I think, just like making sure that you kind of have the foundation right. There's so many things in a company when you're like working really fast that there's almost never enough time to do. But so I think like some things that we've been doing during the pandemic is to be very kind of like more introspect time, making sure that we kind of build up our structures, our processes, in the most optimal way, so that I feel like we're more kind of, like you can't say like design to scale, but like the foundation is there increasingly so. I also am like a huge believer in just kind of really setting targets and kind of evaluating continuously and always monitoring your KPI and kind of building those out, because it's not like you kind of come up with a master plan and you just kind of execute against it. It's almost like scenario planning where you would be like, okay, this could happen, this could happen, and this could happen. And then you can just kind of switch gear a little bit, and your KPIs and your insights are your points of validation against, that development, so that you can always act quickly. I also think that when you go from being a startup to a scale up, it's really important to spend a little bit of time also on like reflecting upon like what kind of culture do you want, what kind of organization do you need, because as you bring on more and more people, just really reflecting upon that and making sure you always pull the company in the right direction, I think is really meaningful and really important as well.
Well, makes a lot of sense. And
yeah, I think it's really important to just be really intentional about the culture. Culture is such a thing that it's like you have to work on it all the time. Like it kind of comes from the top. What kind of what culture do you want? What kind of values do you want for your company, and how do you live that? But I think if you always are intentional about it, it's easier also for new team members to go on board, and it can also help you kind of adjust your product direction. You're always checking in against, does this reflect our values? Does this reflect the culture that we want? Like what we're part of, like it's the DNA of the company, right?
I think people in startups, when you're 5 people, 10 people, 20, you can talk across, you all know each other so intimately, but when you suddenly go to 40 or 60, you have to think, people's careers, why are they joining? Are they bringing the company to the right direction? And this intimacy when you're small goes away. And I think a lot of companies the leadership there doesn't reflect, because it's been so easy to communicate, but it's so much harder to communicate from small to growing. And I think, that is a really critical part to success as you start scaling, adding people in other regions from different cultures, different backgrounds, different experience, how do you manage them? And I think that's sometimes overlooked, because these early stage companies, the startups are just so used to making everything work that now they have to think more, professional career development for the people they're taking on and everything. So
yeah, I agree. And I think like one almost like parallel dimension to that a little bit is like, I always have found it really meaningful when it comes to like people and managing people and like, growing divisions or companies, that you need to understand like what motivates your team and like what motivates different team members, because it's very kind of personal. Like, why are you in this like job? Like what gets you out of bed in the morning? Is it, some people are incentivized by like good job and pats on the shoulders. Others are, more financially driven, and others are like very much about being part of a team, whereas others just need to do their own thing and be very individualized, So I think that is also one thing that just getting that right, then you can help people have like fun at work, and you can also kind of help cater to what do they need to produce well. And I think staying on top of that and checking in on like what drives you is really important as well, because it's so personal.
Well, I think the culture aspect is very, Norwegians are totally different, and even UK, it's a totally different ballgame already there. And we might think we're similar, but in terms of the aspects there are in business, then there are different rule sets from social life also. You also have to understand that that might not be the same. Even if you feel the same culture in the social aspects, you still might be there. So
yeah, and also professional differences too, right?
It's a challenge. Yeah. And of course, having Trine on board, being global business, been living in different countries, I guess that's very smart of Spond to do, actually. So getting yes.
Trine is a globetrotter. Yeah.
Okay. It's also like little things that when you talk to a British guy or like an American guy and they both say the same word, interesting, it has like a completely different meaning if a Brit says it or if like an American person says it. So that's like little things like that is always good to know, right?
Really? No.
Yes.
Trine, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good luck to you and your Spond company. We definitely will hear a lot from you in the coming up years.
Thank you.
First Tuesday sine faste samarbeidspartnere DNB, Deloitte og Escalon Services.